Hello, CaribHRForum. If you've ever wondered how it is that you don't know anyone who has made the journey from being a regular person to being someone who is skilled in people analytics, and you've read about them, you've seen them on the internet, you've probably watched a few videos, but you don't know anybody personally because such people are pretty difficult to find right here in the Caribbean. Well, in this interview with me, Francis Wade, the host of CaribHR Forum, just in case we haven't met, I'm going to be interviewing Tamika Stewart. Tamika is the owner of her own instructional design and training company here in Jamaica. And she's no stranger to us at CaribHR Forum because she has presented a few times at our prior conferences. Tamika, welcome to the 2023 virtual conference.
Thank you so much, Francis. I appreciate it. Yes, I had the pleasure of presenting twice.
You
I've become
sure
a
did.
frequent since COVID.
I know. It's
A good
COVID has us
thing.
brought us to this place.
Blessings,
Uh,
COVID blessings.
but as I mentioned, thanks for appearing and coming to spend time with us to tell us your story. I was really struck by it and really wanted folks to understand and appreciate, what it's like to take a journey that's a pretty non-linear journey because it's not like you go and, there's no degree in people analytics that I'm aware of that you can
Oh,
take even in the world or even here in the Caribbean. You have to get your experience and your learning from different places. And the way that you put yours all together and overcame all sorts of obstacles and friction in order to reach where you are. I let's talk and share your story. And I know your story starts in an unusual place, which is working with a BPO. I won't say how many years ago, but in the early part of your career, you started
yes,
as a customer service representative in a BPO. Now, most people who know of BPOs think that work there, me that never wanted that work there.
right, right.
I
But
know you have a different point of view.
think early 2000s. I could be off on my day, but please forgive me, right? I'm not as young as I look. um, but yeah, so my journey is started right after college. Actually, I decided to venture into the world of work, and the opportunity came for me to work with a BPO company at the time known as E-Services. That was operated by Patrick Castley and his team. I think his name has become very synonymous with the global BPO services industry. And so, yes, I started there at the customer service level as a customer service representative working with an insurance client. And so that was my first, you could call it, segue into the world of work and also into BPO. I stayed with them for approximately 5 years and decided I wanted more. So I went back to school to pursue my first degree. And so after completing my first degree, I moved back to Montego Bay. Um,
Well, let me jump in just a little bit because I want to hear some more about your experience. Because you finished college with your A levels, and then I guess you went to William Knibb and Montego Bay High School. Did I get that right?
I attended for high school, it was Montego Bay High School. I taught at William Knibb, never went there as a student.
Oh, you were. Oh, that was okay. I don't want to get too far ahead into the story,
Yes.
but
No, you're
but most people's conception of BPO work is that it's a slog. There in Jamaica we say them slave you up because it's repetitive, it's dull, there's no challenge in it, and for intelligent people it's like, you know a death knell. It has a characteristic, or there are rumors and there's talk that it's not what you want to be doing. Um, but that wasn't your experience, correct?
not necessarily. I mean, when I started in BPO, it was an exciting time for the industry. And so I did not see it as being dull. Granted, it is repetitive because you are taking phone calls as a customer service representative. That's what you do. That's the agreement. That's what you go to work to do. But it could just be me and my mindset. I know I had other plans. My plans did not include me staying there forever, but I needed to work, and so they provided the opportunity for me to do that and earn very well because one of the things that the BPO industry is actually famous for is that they pay at a better rate. They pay better than most of the industries in Jamaica, right? And not only that, but you also get an opportunity to be incentivized. And so, if you are a young person and you have a goal and you are driven, then you will use it as a stepping stone somewhat to be able to do the other thing that you want to do. So I would not necessarily put a negative spin on BPO. The environment is different because, and this will become more relevant as the conversation continues, right? The environment is different because it is very it's very productive driven, right? Inherent in the BPO services industry, whenever the centers start up, inherent in that agreement between the service center and the client is what they call SLA agreements, right? Which include your service level agreements, and it includes things like talk time, handle time, and so you recognize that by nature of the center being what it is, they have to have the tools and technology in place to be able to access data, track data, because the environment is very much production and numbers driven. So a lot of people find that very pressuring. Um, but that was not my focus. As a customer service
Right.
representative, was
Mo-
not my focus.
Most people who take a first job, and this is true for HR, engineering, like I did, or whatever it is you decided you do as a first job. You explained to me when we talked before that you had daily feedback, maybe even more than daily, in terms of how you were performing and whether or not you were hitting your numbers, because there was constant feedback. You had constant metrics and analytics about your performance. So there was this
Most
close
certainly.
close
Most
match
certainly.
between you're doing your job and you're getting feedback on the job. But most of us, as you know, we don't our first jobs do not look anything like that. Matter of fact, most of us in the first year of our work, we have no clue how we're doing, and we think that any minute now they're gonna come and tell us that, boy, we don't really like you need to leave. And we say, why? And you say, well, you kind of don't fit in, and some vague business. And so we struggle in our first jobs to figure out how we're doing, because there's usually no feedback, or there's definitely not immediate feedback. And maybe after a year, if you're lucky, you may get a
Mhm.
performance management review. And the ones I got when I was in my first 5 years they were terrible. They were all vague and all over the place, and I couldn't do anything with them. And it was frustrating to me because I wanted to get better, but I couldn't. But
Is it
from
is
what
it
you
is
told
it
me,
any wonder then that the industry is considered to be worth 600 million US dollars?
this is the BPO industry in Jamaica alone.
Yes.
Right. So this is not what you experienced. Tell us what it was like to, be onboarded, and what it was like to adjust to that culture of continuous feedback using analytics, using data.
I think one of the plus from my experience is that I had nothing to compare it to. So it was my very first job. I had nothing to compare it to. I did not go in with a certain type of expectation, and to say, okay, fine, what am I getting myself into? I had nothing to compare it to, so it became my reality. It became my reality. It became something that I was used to. And if you think about it, I mean, even though it is unique in that sense, I mean, for someone coming from, college and knowing that you are measured, there's always
Right.
measuring, right? In
Right.
high school and
Right.
college, it was in the form of tests, exams.
Right.
So
Right.
you know that you are constantly tested on how well you are doing. And so the
Right.
mindset was already there. So I did not see it too much as a challenge. It was actually more of an advantage because as a customer service representative who had the opportunity to earn extra based
Right.
on things like your average talk time, your handle time, and your quality, it was always good to know where you were trending in terms of the numbers, so that as you went throughout your day, you had an opportunity to recover. If you saw that your handle time was getting too high, you immediately started to strategize and say, okay, fine, on the rest of my calls for the remainder of the day, I need to make sure that I'm wrapping up by X number of minutes, so that I can close out my day at this number. I don't want to close out my day with my talk time being X, because of course it impacts your overall weekly numbers and your monthly numbers. So I think because it was like that, it put you in the frame of mind to constantly want to know where you are, so that if in the middle of your game you can adjust, then you do that so that you can get the desired outcome. So that's how I look at
Right.
it.
Wow. Yeah. And I get you were used to, for example, your manager or someone in HR or a trainer bringing the numbers to you, and then
It was actually my supervisor, direct supervisor. So
supervisor.
your supervisor, the environment was one in which the supervisor sat with the team. The supervisor had, access to the tools and the technology on their system, so they were always getting it real time. They could always access it real time. They knew how their team was doing at any given time, and that information was given to them in real time.
Wow. So they could come and tap you on the shoulder and say, Tamika, it looks like your average talk time is getting a little long. Could
And that
you
used to
adjust
happen.
it?
It used to
And that's
happen.
exactly the kind of
Um,
conversation.
yeah, it used to happen
Mhm.
because if the supervisor recognized that there was an agent that was sitting on a call for too long, and we know that the average service time is supposed to be anywhere between 3 to 5 minutes, then immediately that supervisor knew that something was going on, and they may need to reach out to the agent to find out if the agent needed any assistance, or if the agent was having any kind of difficulty on the call. it's,
Wow.
it's unique in that way. Yeah, in
Right,
terms of the
right,
interventions, you can immediately apply coaching interventions. And so it is that uniqueness why it makes it a little bit different. Some may, it varies in terms of how people respond to it. But again, the nature of the industry and that uniqueness, I think, is what makes it work in terms of being able to develop employees in a particular way, being able to provide feedback and coaching in a particular way, because the nature of the industry and the service center is set up in that way.
right. For those of us listening who have never been in a call center and never interacted with that industry, it's dramatically different from what most people do in average jobs, where, like I said, feedback is bad or non-existent or
Well,
vague or non-numeric, or you
right.
really can't do anything with it because you kind of
and
like,
and
what
you
that
know
mean?
what, and not to cut you, Francis, but that what I had a very rude awakening when I
We're gonna
ventured on
we're
my
gonna
own
share that when we get to as you
and
tell your
started
story,
doing
right?
consulting. I
Uh,
had moments where
we're
I'm
gonna,
like, what? So everybody does not have performance date? No? Okay.
all
Maybe
right, we're
it's
gonna get to
tricky.
that. so you left at a 20 something year old. You left the BPO industry, and went into did you go right into your undergrad, your first degree?
I did. I had dreams of going into journalism.
Oh, really? We're glad you're here with us, frankly, the journalist.
I
But that's
can laugh
cool.
about that now.
There's 3 more years of measurement, feedback. You're still in that world of data and analytics, and then you went on to teaching, right? Where there's even, again, more data, more.
Interesting.
So you
Right.
spent
This
a
time
couple of
on the
years
flip side,
teaching,
this time I was the teacher, not the student.
right?
And so then I became responsible for performance measurement in a sense, right? Which
Right,
for high
exactly.
school looks like testing our students. I had a grade 11 group at the time, my first year teaching. I had a grade 11 group. They were getting ready for CXC, and their preparation process gets a little bit more rigorous at that level, right? So it did include testings. It did include providing them with practice papers so that they can familiarize themselves with the structure of the exam. And so, yes, you could say that performance management continued because even though they may not view it that way, but that's exactly what happens when you give the tests. You look for the feedback, you look at how the class is doing. If a majority of your students are failing, it tells a story. It says something. If you give a test and you recognize that more than 50% of your class failed, then as the teacher, it is potentially saying to you that you may need to revisit that topic because the students may not have learned it as well as you thought they did. So even then, that number itself gave you information about what was going on, what was potentially going on, right? If
Right.
you wanted to see exactly um, where that fallout is, then you may have to just look very closely at the areas on the paper where they did not do so well, and you could get even more information. But the number itself, more than 50% failing, immediate red flag to a teacher that, okay, I more than likely need to revisit this topic because it doesn't seem as if everybody learned as well as I thought they did.
Right. And from an analytic point of view, you're using the data in order to analyze the student's performance. So we know we don't usually talk about school that way. Most of us aren't teachers. Most of us are on the other side of the, but we don't see that that's really what the teacher is doing. It's really a people analytics activity. So it's
Yes,
interesting. So the first 10 years of your career, you're bathing in analytics of all different kinds. You're
yes,
in this world of continuous feedback and of
yeah,
performance and of using data to get to high levels of performance. And I
yeah.
imagine at this point you're thinking that this is how the whole world looks.
Yeah,
Um,
at least my world looked like that. And of
your world
course,
is definitely that way.
and then
You're
of
so,
course, when I went out into the world with that frame, thinking that, okay, fine, yeah, that's the world. And you're like, no, okay, that was,
but smart thing for you. So tell us about your next move because this is it's almost like you decided to combine the best of everything in order to make your move back into the BPOs. But this was
I,
now in a different
and
capacity.
it's not even me because it may sound, if you look at it that way, it may sound as if it was planned from day one. None of
It
this.
sounds so.
I did
It
not
wasn't
know
planned.
at any given point. It was not my plan. As I said, you remember what I said before? I wanted to go to. My first degree was supposed to have been journalism. That did not happen. And so, when I moved back to Montego Bay from Kingston, looking for a job,
Mhm.
of course, because you need to work. And so the opportunity presented itself for me to work as a teacher at my alma mater, which I found very cool. Right. I taught there for a year. And then I also did a term at William Nib, teaching English literature and English language. Of course, both opportunities were contractual, and at this time I started wanting more permanent work. And
Right.
so that's where I got led back to BPO because I saw a position advertised for a particular company in Montego Bay. I was encouraged by a very good friend of mine to go ahead and apply. So the opportunity was for that of site training manager. I knew nothing about training. I knew nothing about management. All I had at the time was just my teaching experience. I was encouraged by a very good friend to go ahead and apply. I applied, and as they say, the rest is history. I was selected as the candidate of choice, and I started in that role in 2012 and worked with the company for almost 5 years as their site training manager. And so going back into BPO this time as a training manager, responsible for managing the training department, which was responsible for the onboarding and training of all the employees that came into the organization to work with the different clients. I would say that my interaction with data and numbers um, became even that more
More
deeper.
intense.
Yeah, if we could
But
say that.
take us a little bit into that job of being a training manager in that environment because you're dealing with high school and college graduates, I guess, who are coming in. They are not they've never done this before. What are some of the challenges that they have, and how do you tackle the challenges they have using the data that you're able to gather and the feedback you're able to give because of the data?
It was interesting because most of them are cool system background, right? So they're used to the same Jamaican training.
Okay.
And so the difference that they were introduced to was the fact that the training included what we like to call simulation activities, because of course it was customer service and other lines of businesses. So they had to do simulations, meaning we had to do mock calls. So their training consisted of not just theoretical, we walk them through what is customer service, product knowledge, and so on. But then a big part of their training included mock calls, which are simulations, right? And they also did what we like to call side by sides. So they were able to, for a portion of their classroom training, be placed on the production floor, seated beside agents, and they got an opportunity to listen and watch. And also, as we were in the training room, we also allowed them to hear calls as well. So that was a big part of their training curriculum.
Great. And what are some of the obstacles they had to, getting up to speed in this very new environment?
For the most part, they did not find it challenging. We did actually have from time to time students who struggled, right? Um, and a lot of their struggles had to do with just fear, just
Oh
a
yeah.
fear. For some of them, they've never done it before. There were those who were coming from other BPO companies, so they knew. But
Okay.
then there were those who were coming from other segments of the society, from different job functions. And so this whole BPO on the phone thing was completely new. And I had one particular case, which I love to share and I love to talk about. This one particular young lady, we had hired her for one of the customer service clients that we had at the site. And she was coming from a background of just administrative work. To put it more simply, she was doing filing at the tax office in Montego Bay. And so at the end of her classroom training, I did not have much confidence in what she would have been able to do. And so, as is customary, we are required to meet with the managers and supervisors for the teams that our trainees are going to be placed on, and to give them feedback about their classroom performance, and to let them know what the expectations are. We also, it was important too, because at that point, if we saw that an employee was not a trainee, was not performing as we would expect them to, the decision could also be taken at that moment whether we wanted to have them continue or if we wanted to discontinue their employment. And so I remember having a meeting with the manager for that particular client at the time, and I literally said to her, in all honesty, I was being very honest. I said, well, I called her name and I said, listen, some people justify.
So you
I
basically said she need to go back a tax office and go take the filing work back.
forgive me, Lord. I said it, and I was not being rude. It was just that I saw that she was struggling, and the manager said to me, "What? Are you serious?" And I said, "She's struggling. She's struggling." And we did the interventions in class. We took her aside, tried to make sure that it wasn't that she was not understanding the topics. We tried to move her in terms of her placement in the room. So we moved her from persons who were not so strong, to put her with those who were doing strongest, in hopes that some of that. So we did all the strategies, but at the end of the day, she was still struggling for whatever reason. And so I said it to her, and she said, so she they wanted the number of persons that we had in training.
Right.
They wanted, it
The
was a
exact number.
capacity. Yes.
They
And
needed
so
the
she
numbers.
said, I said to her, well, the decision is yours. If you want us to move her through classroom training and then put her into what we call nesting, which is on the job training, right? We call it nesting, but they still belong to the training department at this time. We could do that and we could continue the work there and see if there was some improvements. And she said, all right, Tamika, if you think that's what I should do. And I'm saying, yeah, if you want to do that, that's fine. I will support you. I will try to make sure that we support this trainee as much as we can. and see how it goes from there. And she's like, okay, fine, I'm okay with that. She says, all right, that's fine. Let's go ahead and graduate all of them, and then we start with their on the job training, which is nesting on Monday. OJT was an experience with that young lady, because I tell you, it's customary that on day one we have the strongest students log onto
Mhm.
the phones, the ones that had more confidence, and then we
Uh-huh.
use the same buddying system. So the ones who
Uh-huh.
were weakest would sit beside them and observe them for half that first day, and then
Uh-huh.
no, for the latter part of the afternoon we would have those ones no log on. So by the end of day one, all trainees had to be on the phones, and I tell you, I took up permanent posts beside this young.
Because you're sure she was going to
I
get into
took up a
trouble.
permanent resident. I was sure. I was sure. So I'm sitting beside her, and at any moment I'm ready to take over a call. Right. So yes, it was a struggle for her, and so I sat beside her for all of day one. We came back for day two, and I was ready to take up my usual post. So go back to my watch post, and something said to me, don't sit beside her, leave her alone. And so I decided to do that. I decided I was not going to sit, because I also was a little bit concerned if potentially my presence may have been intimidating, especially
Okay.
because she knew that I was also the, even though I was assisting with training them, right? Some people are like that. And so I just decided to leave her alone and have her work among her peers and her new supervisor. And she completed nesting successfully and passed nesting, did well, and
Past
we
her
moved
numbers
on,
were up to par, basically,
enough for her to stay on, right?
right? So
And
she didn't get
she didn't get booted.
she
We're
didn't get
glad for
booked.
that, right?
Right.
Right. So we saw that there was improvement there. But what the most surprising part of this story is, one day I was in my training room, and the manager, the same manager, she came back to me and she said to me, Tamika, I have something to tell you. And I'm like, what? And she's like, you're not going to believe this. And I'm like, what? What is it? What is happening? And she's like, okay, so you remember the young lady that you said that she was just supposed to file, say some people for file? She is our top agent for CSAT. Literally, what the manager said is she sound like them blonde valley girl.
She was so she's dealing with Americans, right, on the phone, and she's now picked up an accent where her mannerism and intonation makes her sound like she's in California somewhere and not Kingston,
With blonde hair.
not
She's
Montego Bay, Jamaica.
Caucasian with blonde hair.
Because she's
And not
sounding
only
so
that, but she was
authentic.
delivering superb customer service. And what was amazing was that the minute she received that, she didn't stop. It was consistent every month. She was their top CSAT agent, and she continued that way until I moved on to
Wow.
another opportunity. But I always tell that story because one, she made me eat a healthy dose of humble pie, which is fine. I don't mind. I don't mind. I wanted her to prove me wrong. I wanted her to
Right.
prove me wrong. So that's fine. But it tells me that the support and the interventions, and I think that the environment helped too, because had she not been aware of where she needed to improve, what it was that she wasn't doing, if the tools and the technology was not
Wasn't right
available
there.
for her to get that information, and for her to know, okay, I need to up my game, I need to do better, this is the area that I need to do better in, I think it would have been even more difficult for her to do what she did.
Right. You also mentioned, I remember we spoke that the quality of her calls. So you review calls and you have, I guess, like a checklist or something to
Right. So
measure
what
the call
happens is,
quality.
as yeah, so what happens is, because we are in training, we get access to recorded calls, and we usually liaise with the quality department to get the best calls, and we put them together, and we would use that for our training classes. And so it became a thing where we were using her calls. Her calls became the model calls for that particular client. And so whenever we had employees being trained for that particular client, her calls would be played in the class, as exemplary calls, of what we wanted them to do. So yeah, that was a big success story. I was
Wow.
excited to have a part of that.
It's a little bit like being a coach of a sprinter, and you give them coaching, and you're not sure them
Yeah,
taking it, and then them go to the world championships and
and
tear up.
they just blow it out of the water, and you're like, man,
And the numbers don't lie, right? They tell you
no,
you
they
can't.
don't.
You know
You
that
can't
this is
you can't make those numbers up. And of
right.
course, with CSAT, you definitely cannot make those up because that is customer driven. The customer is the one who fills out those surveys. So
Okay.
you either made an impact with them or you didn't.
So those were the
So you
hardest
definitely
numbers to
can't make
move,
them
I
up.
guess. Those are the numbers that you get when they say, please stay on the phone and finish the survey for us. Those are what they call CSAT.
Yes.
Okay.
Customer
So
service satisfaction
so
survey.
fast forward us now to you're leaving the BPOs to go and start your own training company, and you're now entering the real world where things are a bit different. Tell us what you as you go into the first set of companies, what you're discovering.
Yes. So of course, you know, coming from that background, and it is why we are proposing what we are proposing, right? Coming from that background and having that worldview that okay, fine, you know, there was the understanding that you needed to be able to see certain data, some numbers. That much I was aware of. That much I knew. But
Mhm.
when I entered into consultation and I started working for other clients that were not within the BPO space, these are regular businesses seeking help because they are now being faced with performance issues, right? And they called the right person, I must say, right? Because
No. Humble
shameless
pie.
plug, but that's okay though.
Yeah,
They
that's right.
call the right person because I do have a wealth of knowledge. No, the gap was my expectation. So of course, inherent in my, any client contract that I do, I always do an assessment of the situation prior to proposing any kind of solution. And so of course, imagine my shock when I'm doing my assessments. For some, I recognize that they would not have, for example, a learning management system, right? They were smaller scale businesses, and of course, a learning management system or LMS is not something that you just hear being tossed around, in the regular business world, especially here in Jamaica. And so I at least I was not expecting that, but I got a rude awakening when I recognized that LMS was not the only thing that was missing. That in some cases, there was no set structure for coaching and feedback. There was no readily available data that you could get. And so when I started asking about performance and I started asking those very critical questions so that we could try
Mhm.
to get to the root of the problem, I
Mhm.
ran into some challenges. I would often have to just take the information from the supervisor in terms of her explanation of the situation, but she did not have anything, he or she did not have anything to present to me in the form of a report, um, in the form of, showing me that, okay, fine, we have coached for this issue in the past and it continues. None of that. None of that.
And
And
if you're
so,
lucky, if you got a performance management, something other than an opinion, and if you're lucky, even a little luckier, you see something on paper that was written. But
yeah.
there's so
And
many
so I had
companies
to,
in the
I had to have
region.
a very direct conversation with the business leaders at that time in terms of, because I'm very straightforward in terms of me saying there is no way you can continue to operate like this and expect much success. You cannot.
Right, right,
You have to have um, these things in place. And so,
right.
fortunately for the first client, I was able to work with her and her team to set them up with with an employee rewards program, right, in the form of an employee of the month,
Uh-huh.
incentivizing kind of structure. And of course, I got that from BPO because of
Right.
the exposure and
Right.
seeing how it worked. I
Right.
was able to suggest that as a way to motivate her employees because she also started having attendance issues, which led to a lot of
Okay.
cancellations. And that started impacting their bottom line because if your customers, if your employee calls out and they had a certain number of appointments set up for the day, those
Right.
appointments have to either be canceled or rescheduled because you more than likely do not have the capacity to be able to take on those clients. And so of
Right.
course the bottom line was being affected. So I proposed that. What I loved though was their willingness to take the feedback and allow me to do what they trusted me to do. And so
Right.
I proposed that and she did not hesitate. They did not hesitate. They implemented it right away. The whole thing about, having the employee take their photograph, have it posted at the front of the business.
Right.
We got to work on certain things like the values and so on, having those available at the front. And then I worked very closely now with the manager to start constructing for her a coaching system. So I designed a coaching form and I told her that she needed to use that in her sessions, that was going to be her accountability tool, right? And so I left them in a better place um,
But
that I
but
got
you
them,
you weren't
and I'm happy about that.
right.
Of course,
But
there's much more that could have been proposed, but of course, you have
right.
to propose within that company's budget, right? You don't want to if they're not able to take it on, and they're just not able to take it on. But what we're saying is there's still something that you can do, no matter how small or
Right.
no matter how limited you may feel your resources are. There are things that you can still implement to make sure that you have some data available to you
Right.
that would allow you to make more informed
It,
decisions.
it sounds like you took them from you come from where there is a ton of data analytics and feedback and sophistication, and you told me about the work management function which does all the data collecting for you.
And the
So
LMS, we had a
and the LMS
LMS.
that's built in to provide people training on demand. You have all these this world of resources in BPO to manage using analytics and data. And then you come across and I guess this has happened more than once. People who are starting from we don't have nothing.
Zero.
We can't even tell you how well somebody did. Yeah, man, she do all right because she look happy or so all as anecdotes, but no
Yes,
actual capture of data, no
right.
information, no system. And I imagine that in most of your work, that's not BPO related. You're trying to fill the gap to get to where you were, what you basically were
As
swimming in,
closely as possible
as
with
close
what I'm
to,
given.
and
Yes, with
more
what
over
I'm
on this side than over on this side.
But
Starting out,
fortunately for me, though, I do have a current client that is, they're not a local client. So, of course, you find that they have those systems in place as well. So, I'm
so they're
not
over here
struggling with, yeah,
already.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay, great. So you're not totally with the beginner, but the point is, you have so much to offer folks because you know the journey that as and I know as our audience is listening, they're thinking, boy, I would love to have a Tamika with me to help me along on the way that we need to go so that we can take some of those baby steps. I could go to my boss and present a case for us starting because we know we need to do these things. We've known them forever, but we haven't started and we don't know why. We don't know why and what's missing in order to take the first steps that would convince a CEO to even invest in. Yes, we need a performance. I've met CEOs who are all happy that there's no performance management system. They figure, oh well, too hard, too difficult, takes too long.
No, I believe that in this day and age, it is important. I mean, even before it was important, it probably just took a different form. But in order for you to impact the way you truly want to impact, you need reference. Data is reference. If you don't know where you are coming from, what you were doing before, you won't have a clue as to where you want to go. You don't know what to target. You don't know what you're just basically you're just lost. So
Right.
you
Yeah,
have to start with
absolutely.
something.
Right. Right. Which qualifies you to assist the people who, HR departments and professionals who don't want to be lost, who desire some movement for their department or for themselves personally.
Yes.
And I know, well, last time we spoke, I said, so Tamika, we need you to put together some offers. And I know you wouldn't have finished them yet because it
You
was only a
did.
couple of days ago. But I did say, right, Tamika, we need some combination of like coaching and training and different elements. So, and have you started working on them? Can you give us a little bit of insight into what's
I
happening in the
have.
lab, the Tamika
So,
Stewart lab?
yes, what I have brewing in the lab right now, right, is a potential offering that I like to call talk data to me. Talk
Talk
data to me.
data to me.
Top data to me is what I'm currently working on. The modality of that offering, I have not quite nailed it yet, but I do know that what I want to do with top data to me is to propose to HR, right, the overall HR space, to adopt the BPO services sector model for training, developing, and improving the performance of your employees. It works. There's a reason, as I said, earlier, there's a reason why the industry is valued at almost 600 million US. There is a reason, and the reason I believe, I firmly believe it, it is because of the fact that there are those inherent built-in um, requirements for performance data. There is, because again, the clients pay based on performance. And so you have to have things in place to track that. And the plus again is that we're able to perform, we are able to provide more direct and impactful coaching in the areas that matter, because you have the numbers there to tell you what exactly is this person struggling with. You have the calls that you can listen to, they're being QA'd, right? So there's that QA number, that QA score. You can look at the agent's talk time, handle time, and to see where the struggle is, and then you can create an intervention that is tailored to fit that.
Right,
And so you spend less time doing a needle in the haystack kind of approach,
right,
whereas you know where the numbers are, you know what you're looking for, you go directly there, and then you spend the time creating what needs to be created so that you can fix that issue and improve the performance. And the best thing about it is, it's not taking you months to discover that
right,
something is not working. It's not taking
right,
you months to discover that an employee is not performing. It's not
right,
taking you an entire year after an employee has been hired for you to say, oh, this employee is not doing well. Okay, you really should have known that before. And the fact
right,
that you did not know that before, I mean, yes, it is a poor reflection on the employee, but from where I'm sitting, it says more about
right,
what you need to have in place so that you do not have a repeat of those kinds of situations. Because of course, when you onboard employees, you don't onboard them just to offboard them, right?
right,
The agreement is you onboard them, you develop them, you help them to grow and continue their journey in the organization. But if you do not have the tools to help them to grow, then you know what results from that. So yeah,
right,
that's
right,
that's that's really what I'm working on, just to be able to propose to those who are in HR and may not know what that looks like. And so the idea is to explain a little bit more about the tools and technology that they tend to use in the service industry. And again, it's based on what you can do that. You can create something that works for you based on your budget. You don't
right,
necessarily have to take on the full gamut of what they have, because they have quite an extensive selection, right? But if you can mirror one or two tools, or one or two processes, you are certainly on your way to becoming, um, you know, better
world,
able to make
world class even.
more definitive decisions than you
Right.
were
Let me
prior
let me
to now.
ask you a question. Will talk to me also help an
Talk
HR
data to me.
updated to me? Will it also help uh, an HR manager who runs an HR unit, like an HR department? the CEO does not have an HR background. So he keeps saying things like, I don't know what you people in HR are doing. I don't understand. I can't get to, you're not being strategic enough. You're not, but when you ran the training department in the company that you worked for, what was, how did you use
The
data to
model.
communicate to your CEO? And what was that like? Because you had data and dashboards and all of these
And
tools.
again, pardon me if it's not something that happens on a regular, but we are used to the heads of the various units coming together and having a meeting, right? We are also used to the creative latitude to be able to determine amongst ourselves that there is an issue with a particular client that needs to be resolved, and it would be resolved if, for example, training works more closely with HR, or training works more closely with operations. Because I remember for one particular company that I worked with, we had what was called a continuous improvement process. And
Mm-hmm.
that saw all the relevant areas of the business coming together on a frequent basis to discuss performance issues, right? And what that allowed us to do is we recognize that an intervention may not always be training related. It may not
Mm-hmm.
be a knowledge gap. It may not be, that the agent needs additional training. Some issues, some performance issues may be as a result of leadership or management.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
what that allows us to do is to also place accountability where accountability needs to be placed. So the
Mm-hmm.
agreement in that meeting is, if the performance issue is operations or leadership related, then
Mm-hmm.
that arm of the business now needed to put something in place to ensure that their supervisors are better trained or equipped to be able to lead agents effectively to fix that. Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense? And
Yep.
so, our conversation is needed in terms of it. It cannot be that there's a reason why the business has different arms, and
Mm-hmm.
communication is a must for us.
Right.
And so, what was key for me in working in the BPO and working alongside my counterparts was that there had to be communication in every step of the way. There was communication before these persons came into training. We knew who they were being employed to. We
Right.
knew we
Right.
knew who their supervisor was going to be. It
Right.
was it was encouraged that the supervisor actually visit the trainings
Right.
throughout their training. They come
Right.
in, they sit down, they interact with them, and they try to build that rapport.
Right.
And so, of course, they also get to meet the members that they're going to be joining on the production floor through the side by side process, right? Prior to
Right.
us handing it, prior to them moving into nesting, we had to have a conversation again with operations management to say, these are your guys, this is how they're doing. As a matter of fact, we were sending out a daily training report. We were sending out a daily training report, and there were certain key
Wow.
stakeholders who were on that email, and so they could see what was done in training. If there were activities, if there was testing, they could see that. And so
Wow.
I think that made a big difference in how we were able to train them, develop them, and then deploy them.
Well, I could imagine in these meetings that the CEO or a COO or someone is saying, Tamika, what are your numbers for so and so over the last week? And then you tell them, and HR, what are the
Definitely.
numbers for hiring over the last? And then they ask operation, what are the numbers? I wonder if there's a connection between the training and the numbers and you're drawing these correlations, which put you as training right in the middle of the business. It's not that you're doing something over here and, oh well, good luck, take a training and go on your ways. You're in the middle of the business solving problems, and you're able to do that because you all have a common language of speaking, which is data, and
And
you're
it's
analyzing
interesting
it
because,
together.
you know what, not to cut you again, but it's interesting because, I would often say, am I in trainings or am I in operations?
Because it
Right?
became like this, right?
Became symbiotic. I had to know the numbers. I had no choice. I had to know what the KPIs were. The KPIs, I'm sorry, I had to know what the KPIs are. I had to know how the business was doing in terms of overall sales, in terms of, so I had to know the business in terms of what it did to make money. I was not separate and apart from that. So if it's sales that was driving the numbers, I had to know how many sales per day. I knew that. I knew what
Right.
they were pulling in, where they
Right.
needed to be to meet the target. And one would say, but that's really not your business. Like, why would you want to know that as training? But it is important, because then as the training manager who understands that, when we look at our training materials and we look at the persons who are going to be training these people to then go on to go into production and perform, we are able to say, okay, fine, we create that same mindset, and whatever
Right.
we create is driven by that. It's not
Right.
just fluff. It's not fluff. It's not just airy fairy fluff, but
Right.
it's
So
things that work.
So in a way, we're having this conference to sort of get past the airy fairy fluff, as you said, which is prevalent in so many companies. And so, Tamika Stewart, thank you so much for joining us. I remember talking to you felt like stumbling across gold, because
Oh,
we were really wondering, who in the region has people analytics knowledge that we can use at our conference to share with our audience. And you know, if you're not in the BPO world, you don't think of it that way. And we sure didn't think of it.
it's easy to dismiss it, but yes, they're doing great things.
And
They
and
have.
and we,
I
right,
love the technology, love the tools. Definitely made my life a whole lot easier.
and gives you a sort of a standard to move companies towards.
Yes,
Because most companies, with pen and paper, if they even have that, but to move them towards a system that works from firsthand experience. It's not something you read in a book. You've seen it operating. And folks, as you
used
listen
it.
to you used it, right? As you listen to Tabika, do not miss her offering. What's it called again? Talk
Talk
data to me.
data to me.
Oh, it's kind of spicy, right?
That was the idea. I don't know.
It's data to me.
Data, guys.
Data.
Talk data to me. Data.
Data. So, so Tamika, thank you so much for joining us. And folks, you hope
You're
you found
welcome.
value
Thank
from
you
this.
so much
And
for having me, Francis.
Tamika, how can folks get a hold of you and hear more
So
from you directly?
I am on LinkedIn. Um, you can just search for me by my name. You can search for me by Tamika Stewart, or if you want to look up the page for my company, which is TMS Learning Management Consultancy, you can do that. I am on Instagram as the Instructional Architect, or you can go to my website, which is www.instructionalarchitects.com. And if you are interested in having a conversation with me, you may go ahead and choose a date and time on my calendar.
Great. And folks, if you're as a participant in the conference, we'll tell you where the store is and the shop where you can buy Tamika's offerings for the
The
participants
t-shirt is
for the
coming.
conference. Virtual t-shirt. So you'll be able to pick up offerings that Tamika has developed specifically for the conference in our store. So Tamika, thanks again for coming. And folks, tune into. We're going to try and find other role models like Tamika. We're doing our best, but this is the first one in our series. And thanks for joining us. Take care and all the best.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Have a great one, everybody.
Have a
Bye
great
bye.
one.
I can turn on my fan now.